This episode of Marijuana Today Daily is brought to you by the upcoming Homegrown Weed Summit, which is being run by longtime listener to the show, Earl, along with his super solid team of planners. The Homegrown Weed Summit is the first and only online event dedicated to teaching you how to grow elite cannabis from seed to harvest right in your home. The Homegrown Weed Summit is coming up on February 15th and will feature 5 days of online events with noted cannabis pros like Tommy Chong, Danny Danko, and Ed Rosenthal. You can learn more about the Homegrown Weed Summit and get your free ticket now over at homegrownweedsummit.com. That's homegrownweedsummit.com. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Friday, February 5th, 2021, and you're tuned in to episode 1016 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. Kyle Yeager over Marijuana Moment takes the day's top headlines with a look at January cannabis sales in the state of Illinois, which saw record numbers a year after adult use sales became legal. Illinois cannabis shoppers spent a total of $88.8 million at legal adult use shops last month, while more than double the $39.2 million spent in January of last year. One of the great things about Illinois is how they break down their cannabis numbers, showing the split between in-state and out-of-state residents. In this case, more than $23 million in sales were made in legal dispensaries in January from people who came out of state. That's $23 million that was not spent in their home state. In all, Illinois dispensaries dispensed a touch over $669 million in legal adult use marijuana for 2020. Nice. Those are all heroic numbers, which you can dive into more completely over at Kyle's story at Marijuana Moment. As we always do, we have all the news we cover linked to on our website at mjtodaydaily.com. We return to New York State for our next headline with a storyline we covered last week concerning tensions between New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and state lawmakers pushing for the passage of quality legislation to legalize adult use marijuana. As we've covered a number of times here on the Daily in recent weeks, the governor issued a proposed budget last month that includes details for how he would like to see legalization happen. The problem with the governor's plan, at least according to lawmakers like Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, is that there is a better option, namely the legislation that Majority Leader Peoples-Stokes herself has proposed. One of the more contentious issues with Governor Cuomo's budget proposal is that it would actually increase the severity of the punishment for providing cannabis to underage people, giving police a potent tool for the continuing harassment of people of color. There's also perceived problems with how the governor's plans would tax legal sales. Similar to how she spoke out against the plan last week, Majority Leader Peoples-Stokes pressed for the need for legalization to be passed legislatively and said that her bill is the best vehicle for it. It will be very big news indeed when New York State throws off cannabis prohibition, so I'd keep this storyline close on the old industry radar. Virginia rounds out the day in the week's top stories with both the House of Delegates and the State Senate set to pass legislation in their respective legislative bodies today to legalize adult use marijuana. That's important as today is the deadline in Virginia for legislation to be passed out of one chamber so that it has enough time to be considered by the other. So after today's votes, assuming they are successful as expected, the two legalization bills will cross over. The legislation, if ultimately passed, would set up a taxed and regulated sales program open to adults 21 years of age and up, with home grow allowed. Virginia is another big state for cannabis legalization, so I'd also pay attention to this one as it's developing. Those are the top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz out in headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, the upcoming Homegrown Weed Summit, which is being run by longtime listener to the show, Earl, along with his super solid team of planners. The Homegrown Weed Summit is the first and only online event dedicated to teaching you how to grow elite cannabis from seed to harvest right in your home, and is coming up on February 15th through the 19th. Earl and his team have assembled a super stellar cast of cannabis cultivation pros pros who will walk you through all the things you need to know to grow great cannabis at home. If you've been wanting to round out your knowledge of cannabis cultivation, or if you're ready to jump full into the marijuana growing pool, then this event is for you. Just swing over to homegrownweedsummit.com to learn more and to get your own free ticket to the event. You can also peruse the full list of pros that will be presenting at the Homegrown Weed Summit. One more time, that's homegrownweedsummit.com. Big thanks to everyone over at Homegrown Weed Summit for the support that helps us keep the news train chugging along. All right, time for the Blitz. Matt Lamers over Marijuana Business Daily jumps up to Canada for our return to the news with a chart showing how the growth of marijuana sales in both the legal and illicit market has tracked over the last couple of years. With the interesting note here being that, for the first time, legal sales are higher than illegal. According to new data out of Statistics Canada, the sales totals for legal cannabis in Canada in Q3 of 2020 was $824 million Canadian, or $644 million US, while illegal sales were estimated around $754 million Canadian, or $590 million US. As with all Marijuana Business Daily's chart-based stories, there's lots of good context and details to absorb, so maybe not a bad one to open up in full, especially if you have any kind of business interests up in Canada. UK-based drug company GW Pharmaceuticals being acquired by larger drug maker Jazz Pharmaceuticals in a deal valued at more than $7 billion. GW Pharma is best known around these industry parts as the makers of Epidiolex, the first FDA-approved drug derived directly from marijuana. The deal is expected to close in the second quarter of this year and pushed GW Pharma's stock up 46% on the news. Deborah Borchard of our Green Market Report has more on this if you want it. We bounce back to Marijuana Business Daily for another story headed by a chart, this one showing the amount of investment money raised within the legal cannabis industry over the last 5 years. As one might expect after an election where Democrats gained control of the House, Senate, and White House, the amount of money being raised by legal cannabis companies has already jumped up, with $1.6 billion in capital raised so far just last month. That's nice to see given the hugely depressive effects that the coronavirus has had on industry investment. So far, it's looking like this year is going to be a bit of a banger in terms of marijuana investment. State marijuana regulatory officials in California freaked out a lot of people in that state at the beginning of this week when they sent out more than 300 emails to cannabis business license holders informing them that they were being stripped of their license to operate, with the reason being cited that the license holders had been late in filing required information with the government. Thankfully, the 300 license revocations have mostly been fixed, as state regulators were hit with a lot of frantic phone calls asking about the license stripping on Tuesday. Alex Traverso, spokesperson for the California Bureau of Cannabis Control, was not able to share any information with Marijuana Business Daily as of publication time as to why the apparent licensing snafu happened, but it does appear that the state did move quickly to rectify the matter. Ben Adlin, our new regular over at our weekly show Marijuana Today, picked up on a proposed bill in Washington state to decriminalize the possession of small amounts of all drugs, similar to a voters' initiative passed in November in neighboring state Oregon to do the same. House Bill 1499, if passed into law, would remove criminal penalties for being caught with small amounts of all drugs in Washington state and would increase resources for people living with substance abuse problems. Full drug decriminalization has to be the next horizon for our movement, so I'd make sure to add this one to your stories to read in full today. Deborah Borchard has another story on the Daily with a detailed look at the current state of the company MassRoots, which is known for bleeding insane amounts of cash while bouncing around to different business models every few months. The company is led by founder Isaac Dietrich, who appears to be some sort of fundraising god, able to draw in investment money even as his company has shown net losses of nearly $250 million in the past 2 years, and that is right now more than $83 million in debt. This is a company that reported booking just over $2,300 in revenue for the first 9 months of 2020, and that is currently hyping its plan to spring back to life selling $50 plastic cups and stickers with the MassRoots logo. I'm honestly just fascinated by this very long-running train wreck of a storyline, and I would suggest you dive into it too, if only for the entertainment. Pop over and give Deborah's story a read. We end the day and the week on a happier news note with a crowdfunding campaign raising enough money to buy a new home for 69-year-old Michael Thompson, who was freed from prison last week by Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer after spending more than 20 years behind bars for selling marijuana. We've covered this storyline a few times, as Mr. Thompson's case is a good example of the countless people who are in prison right now for doing things that a lot of legal marijuana entrepreneurs are making money on legally. It should definitely be noted here that the vast majority of people making money in legal marijuana at the moment are white, and the majority of people behind bars for selling it illegally are black, as Mr. Thompson is. That is wrong, and until that gross racist injustice is fixed, this whole legalization thing hasn't really been fully won. It's great to see the crowd buy Mr. Thompson a home, but it's still kind of messed up that they had to in the first place. Don't ever forget this storyline. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again on Tuesday with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, Homegrown Weed Summit, and to our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the patron listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today.
One take, Shay. One take.